Today's episode is brought to you by We Break You Buy. Interested in sports cards and memorabilia? Check out We Break You Buy on TikTok. We Break You Buy is a small operation run by three brothers, offering spots for a chance at winning some incredible sports cards and memorabilia. That's We Break You Buy. Check it out today on TikTok.
I eat and I mute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Why Wasn't It Better? I am your host, Patrick Darms.
And I'm your co-host, Anton Paras.
We have a recent return guest with us, Ben Hill. Welcome back to Why Wasn't It Better?
Well, thank you so much for having me, guys.
No, welcome back, Ben. How you doing?
Outstanding. Hope you guys have been great.
Definitely been great.
Yeah.
Hasn't been long since you were last on when we talked about that terrible X-Men film.
Still pretty good. I'm
If you say so.
I'm still rooting for it.
Have you started the fan club?
No. It's like me and two people on a subreddit. Everything else is just like hate. So,
since then, I thought about a couple things. One, Ben, I never asked, have you seen X-Men 97?
I haven't, because I was waiting for the entire thing to be finished so I can just watch it all the way through.
Okay, and so I'm guessing it's just about time for that, right?
Yeah, pretty soon. Like
Nice.
This week or next week.
Right, well, we'll chat once you watch it and get your thoughts, because I know you're a big X-Men fan, so curious to know.
Yeah.
May I ask why X-Men 97 is not yet finished in 2024?
They just remade it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally a continuation of the 90s series, but they're staying in the 90s.
It's a cash grab.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
It's a cash grab.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, so today, this is going to be the oldest film that we've ever covered so far, Anton.
That's fun.
Is it?
I mean, it is, because we get to see a whole different era, different actors, different actresses.
I think it is fun. Yeah, it is fun. Yeah, this movie is from 1960, and it feels like it could have been made in 1940. And I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. I think it's really interesting to visit films like this that are just really a product of another time. And Ben, you were kind of a late addition to this episode. Originally, it was just going to be Anton and you and I were talking. I hadn't expected you had actually seen this, and you're like, not only do I have it, I will be on this episode with you. And I was just delighted.
It's like, yeah, why not? Can't wait to talk about it. Time travel is like one of my favorite things of all time to talk about. So, yeah.
This is the original time travel? Was there anything written about time travel before the original H.G. Wells novella, The Time Machine? I'm sure there must have been, right?
Well,
but this is really what put it on the map.
Right. And H.G. Wells did coin the term time machine. So, in that sense, yes.
Well, that alone makes it worth talking about.
Yes, it does.
So today, it's The Time Machine, the original Time Machine from 1960. We will get to that 2002 remake at some point later on the podcast. Probably not for a long time, because Anton, frankly, I don't want to talk about that film for a long time.
Yeah, it's going to be a bit. But we have a fun one today.
We do. This was a request from one of our listeners, who happens to be my father. Very early on, when we were thinking about films to include on our list that fit the bill for Why Wasn't It Better, this was one of the films that he first suggested to me. He was a young lad when this film came out. He was a fan, of course, of the original novel. And I saw this with him when I was a kid. This was something that, I probably had not seen this movie for, I want to say 25 years. It had been a long time. And I was really happy when he suggested this, because, like I said, Anton, it's fun to talk about some of these older films. It's just so interesting to assess them, to see the similarities between newer movies and then some of the differences and stuff you just really wouldn't see anymore.
Yeah, and this is a really good example also of just what people did with budgets back in the day. Relatively smaller budget for a film, and how people had to get creative.
Creative is the right word, and small budget is correct. This film had a a really small budget. I was actually shocked to do the research on this to see how little money they actually spent. Because even for the time in 1960 when this was made and released, this was a low budget film. I would think the biggest budget film up until this point would have been like Spartacus, Ben-Hur, those types of films. And they had budgets typically in the range of 10, $15 million. That would have been an enormous amount of money to spend on a film back then. And just as a reminder to our listeners, the inflation amount from 1960 to about now is about 10x. So they were making $100 million movies back then. It just wasn't reflected in the inflation. And this film, far less than that. But before we get into that, Ben, as you finish your turkey sandwich, is there
Yes.
anything that you'd like to plug for this week's episode?
Same thing as last time. Everyone just do better. That's it.
Great message, Ben. Thank
I
you.
love it.
So yeah, let's get going.
All right. So the time machine. Scientist H. George Wells builds a time machine. And despite the warning from his friend David against, quote, tempting the laws of providence, end quote, he decides to visit the future. Jumping ahead 14 years, he observes changes in women's fashion. Jumping ahead 40 years, he meets David's son and amid a terrible war. And then finally, he travels thousands of years ahead to discover a post-apocalyptic world inhabited by the humanoid Eloi and the monstrous Morlocks that feed upon them. The Time Machine was released on August 17th, 1960 by MGM and Galaxy Films. It was directed by George Powell. The screenplay was written by David Duncan, and of course it is based on the novella The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, starring Rod Taylor, Yvette Mimo, Alan Young, and Sebastian Cabot. The budget was $829,000. That is the equivalent of $8.6 million adjusted for inflation. And the box office was $2.61 million. That is $21.7 million adjusted for inflation. So I mentioned why this film was chosen. It is a listener request by my father. Shout out to Ken Darms. Ben, as this week's guest, why the Time Machine? Why did you want to come on and talk about this film?
So it actually has one of my favorite tropes in there of all time. It's like when you're time traveling and, they don't want to really pay for someone else to be a part of the show or the movie. They just have this person play their child or their grandchild later on. And what's his name? Philby. When he was like, "Oh, Philby, do you recognize me? Oh, I believe you have I believe you're talking about my father." I was like, yes, I love it. And that's just like one of my favorite things about this. Also a little bit like sketchy with him just staring at the mannequin through the window the entire time. And I'm like, all right, just waiting for one of those, man, let me see that leg, or good old early 1900s talking. So yeah. And also time travels are dope.
Simpler times.
Yeah.
This was a film made during simpler times.
Yeah.
I have a very fond memory of seeing this film with my father as a very, very young kid.
Mhm.
I actually was talking to my dad kind of recently, and I'm like, where would we have watched this, right? And it would have been AMC, which is a cable channel, right?
Mm-hmm.
AMC is a very different channel now than it was in the 1990s for all of our millennial listeners. If anyone remembers, AMC back in the day was a very interesting channel for cable because when they actually would show movies, it was commercial free. They would, of course, have commercials in between their features, but when they actually showed a movie, which is what they did nonstop, it was commercial free, and it was a great way to watch older movies. It was this, and I think Turner Classic Movies.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But they had the same thing, right? No commercials when they actually showed the movie. This was in an era before Mad Men, before Breaking Bad, before they really had any kind of original programming outside of just, I don't recall the gentleman's name, but it would usually be some older film critic. He would introduce the movie. He would say how much he liked it or disliked it, and then they would just play the movie, and that's what you got, and it was great. This is in the days before every channel took it upon themselves to show reality TV. So that's how I first saw The Time Machine.
Yes.
And it's just a great memory of mine.
Well, it's great to have such close memories attached to it, Pat. I mean, for me, this film was something that I watched. It was a public library special. So the fact that we have a big growing up, we had a really big VHS selection at the public library. It was great to be able to see and be introduced to so many like classic films, including The Time Machine from 1960. And that was one that I remember my parents saying, hey, like, this is something we watched growing up, and showing me and my sister when we were younger. And I remember like having, it wasn't my favorite film as a kid, but at the same time, it was cool to be introduced, because this was also, like I said, a very unique film and one of the really early science fiction films. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
I feel like this is a perfect public library movie. I don't know why, but it is.
It has that vibe for sure.
Yeah. I think the literary connection is obvious, right?
Yes.
And as far as the theme of this podcast, why wasn't it better? It's a lot easier to cover newer films, right? It's very easy to tell with a newer film when a movie has a lot of hype and when it is seen as a disappointment in some way. With a film this old, it's a lot harder to assess that, right? Now you can go and read contemporary film reviews like I did to prepare for this.
Mhm.
Those can be often misleading, right? Because that like there's a very famous New York Times review of this film, but that doesn't really tell you how general audiences reacted to it in 1960. Best that I can tell, which is the conversations with my father, is there was a lot of hype for this film in 1960. Obviously, the H.G. Wells book is one of the most famous science fiction novels of all time, even to this day. I would imagine even younger listeners have probably heard of it. You know, he wrote The Time Machine and War of the Worlds. Those are two really famous science fiction novels. So
Yes.
any film adaptation of his work, especially those two, it was a big deal then. It was a big deal now, right? I mean, we're now 20 years removed, but the 2005 War of the Worlds version, that was a huge deal. By the way, that is a film we are going to be covering on this podcast later this year for the 20th anniversary. There's a little future plug for all of our listeners. But I think this is a worthy candidate for the podcast. Now, before we get into the production history, I have a couple questions for both of you.
All right.
Let's
Have
go.
either of you seen Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes? This is a listener question.
I have not.
Not yet.
The memes are pretty big for the Proximus Caesar character.
In a good way or a bad way?
In a good way. Like, well,
Okay.
it's funny enough. Good way, bad way. What is it if people are just repeating lines from the film continuously because they enjoy it and the meme of it? I think a film has some sort of effects if it's doing that, and that's part of the popularity. I just don't know if it's a film series that I necessarily want to dive into.
Well, way back in our inaugural episode, Anton, we talked about how disappointing most of the Planet of the Apes movies are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ben, you like Planet of the Apes?
The first one was just too long, right? Even for like one of those movies back then, it was like one of those 2 VHS style tapes like Ben-Hur. And it's just like, all right, we get it. And so all around, not really, but
Well,
I mean, I'll watch it while I'm doing other things. You know, it's definitely a background movie.
Yeah, it's like that's a movie you put on, like you put on one of the sequels to do your taxes.
Yeah. Clean your room and
Yeah, the sequels got pretty weird. But even now, this is after the sequel trilogy. So this is a continued series, right, of the new Planet of the Apes films. And so I think we're getting into that territory of where the original Planet of the Apes were, where it was getting weirder and weirder with every film.
You mean the original movie?
Right.
Far, far in the future.
Exactly.
That'd be kind of cool if they came full circle. But the reason I wanted to address this is, you know, of course, we always get listener questions about like, why haven't you covered this new movie or that new movie? And it's like, it's really hard to cover new movies for us. We are so wrapped up in doing the research on a lot of these films that, frankly, Anton, a lot of times we want to cover new movies. We just don't have the time to actually get to the theater and see them.
Exactly. And it's important to note, time is an important factor of being able to analyze these films.
It is.
Time machine. That's good.
That's why you said it, Ben. No, but like in all seriousness, though, like we've reviewed new films on this podcast before, and it's tough. It's like, where do you assess it?
Yeah.
Where do you assess its legacy in the moment? You almost feel like you're just writing a review, and I can probably speak for a lot of our listeners that like my opinions on movies constantly change the more I see them. Some films you like every time you see it, the more you like it. And then sometimes it's the opposite, where every time you see it, you're just like, ugh.
Yeah, I mean, a couple examples all the way back in our first, I think it was season 1 or no, season 2 where we covered the Super Mario
Yeah.
and a lot of early takes then because the film was really fresh and I had a unpopular opinion. I didn't like the movie quite as much as others take.
You gave it a pretty decent review, though.
Decent, but of course, being the nerd that I am, I'm very critical.
I actually saw that probably a little bit more recently. I saw that a couple months ago, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I think the interesting one to review. So late last year, we reviewed Avatar: The Way of Water, and that movie was a year old. And that was interesting to assess because I saw it in the theater and then I hadn't seen it again. And I saw it a year after it came out for that podcast. And it was just like, I don't ever want to watch this movie again.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a bad movie, but like, holy crap, it's 3 hours.
Yeah. It's
Took too long with it.
it took way. There are so many things wrong with that film.
It's just so. Ugh. But anyway, the reason that we're actually having this discussion briefly is we mentioned this in our season recap, Anton, where we gave a preview of what listeners can expect. Well, we are going to be reviewing some new films this season. By the time you hear this episode, we probably will have already one of these episodes out. We are not going to say what the movies are. They are going to be surprise episodes, but listeners can expect to hear some new in-theater movies. Hopefully, we will be able to release the episodes the same weekend that these films come out. So
That is bold.
Yep, so-
that
we've
is
done it before. We did it with
Yep,
Mario. We did it with Indiana
Yeah.
Jones. Did
we
we
have
do it
some
with
fun
another
here.
one?
We like to have
Oh,
fun
we did it
here.
with The Killer, the David Fincher movie for Netflix.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, that one was a lot easier because it was on
Dial of
Netflix.
Destiny.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that is coming, and we hope that everyone will enjoy those, even if we don't.
Because we're gonna have fun.
Yeah, we'll have fun, even if we don't enjoy it, which I don't know if that makes sense, but whatever. Speaking of not enjoying things, there's another Bad Boys movie coming out. Is this
I can't wait for it. It's going to be so
I'm
bad.
the-
It's like, how many movies can you
Horrible.
have with Will Smith and Martin? It's like, all right, are they going?
Did
for
you see the
ART
third one?
cards? No.
Bad
It's
Boys
awful.
3.
terrible
Yeah.
movie?
Bad Boys 3. Might as well call it Worse Boys. Am I right?
I mean, look, I love those two guys. I really do. I love Will Smith. I love Martin
Mhm.
Lawrence. I can't remember the last time they were in anything that was good, but
Yeah.
I thought Martin Lawrence was retired, to tell you the truth. When was the last time you saw him in anything?
Been
Bad
a long
Boys 3.
time.
Right.
Well,
Besides that, yeah.
Well,
Bad Boys 3.
Yeah.
I don't think he needs to work. My understanding is that he's very wealthy.
Yeah.
he had his hot streak in the 2000s, right?
Yes.
Mid to late 2000s was his hot streak.
And then it went cold.
Mm-hmm.
But during his hot streak, of course, he made Blue Streak.
Blue Streak. Yes. Yeah.
I love Blue Streak. I love Big Mama's House.
Great movie.
Well, Ben, you can set yourself up to review the newest Bad Boys movie with us if you want.
I will have so many things to say about that. I think that actually might be the first movie I really talk bad about, like ridiculously, because I just feel like it's just gonna be so bad. Like,
Well, that's the thing. It's just like, should we even bother reviewing it on the podcast? Because like, who is expecting that to be good? I don't know.
The
And
people
did
making
you,
it, I
did you
guess,
see there's a
like-
new Beverly Hills Cop as well?
yes, I did.
Oh my gosh.
With Eddie Murphy.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well,
That's been in the works for forever, though.
forever. And I don't know why, because Beverly Hills Cop 3 is one of the worst sequels ever made.
Besides, the best Beverly Hills something film was Beverly Hills Ninja.
Sure.
It had the guy that also played. I think it had the guy that played. What's his name?
Well, if you
He
don't
was-
know it, I don't.
Yeah. Well, he was the main character in the Mortal Kombat film.
Johnny Cage?
No, not Johnny Cage. Liu
Liu
Kang.
Kang?
The guy that played Liu Kang was in it, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no reason you would know that actor's name, but
yeah, it's definitely one of those. Hey, I know
you
you're
don't
from
mean
something."
the world's worst actor, Christopher Lambert, playing a Asian guy in Raiden, right? You don't mean him.
The Highlander.
We do have to review Highlander too.
Someday.
Yeah, eventually. I feel like we're doing everything but talking about the Time Machine.
Well,
Let's do it.
let's do it.
Production
Alright.
history.
H.G. Wells published the novella way back in 1895. 130 years later, it remains a classic of the science fiction genre, and we'd imagine most people, even younger folks, have at least heard of it. There was at least one radio adaptation of this in the 1940s, and the first visual adaptation of the book was a live teleplay done by the BBC in 1949. The man who would eventually direct this version, George Pal, was primarily known for his work with stop-motion animation, and he was nominated for multiple Academy Awards throughout the 1940s. Pal was also a producer. One of the noteworthy films he produced was the 1953 version of The War of the Worlds, which set things up for this film to happen. In 1958, Pal was approached to adapt The Time Machine by Shiro Kido, a Japanese film producer. Unfortunately, Kido eventually left the project, and Pal remained committed to seeing the project through. However, almost no studio in Hollywood was interested, except one, Britain's MGM Studios. The film was created on a tight budget and given a filming schedule of just 29 days. Paul Scofield was George Pal's first choice to play the time traveler. Pal also considered casting a middle-aged British actor like David Niven or James Mason, but they were most likely too expensive. He later changed his mind and selected the younger Australian actor Rod Taylor to give the character a more athletic, idealistic dimension. And it was Taylor's first lead role in a feature film. The name of the film's main character, alluded in dialogue only as George, connects him both with George Pal and with the story's original science fiction writer, H.G. George Wells. The names H. George Wells can be seen on a brass plaque on the Time Machine. Yvette Mimieux was cast in the role of Weena despite having no previous acting experience. During a screen test, director George Pal observed an innocent persona she portrayed, yet despite being his first choice, she was turned down by MGM. Following Pal's insistence, and despite Taylor's preferred choice being Shirley Knight, Mimieux was asked back for another screen test where she was offered the part. Now, Taylor observed her inability to act, describing how he thought she was like, quote, kind of a strange hippie child, quote, and was concerned about her lack of experience and meant she could be difficult to act alongside. Mimieux lied about her age to Pal, stating she was 18, despite being only 17 when filming began. Having initially struggled on set, Mimieux gradually improved as her confidence in acting grew, to the extent that Pal requested that some of her early scenes to be reshot to take advantage of her improved acting ability.
Question. So at what point during the film do you think her acting improved? You don't have to answer that now. Just food for thought. Like what scene do you think they were like, she's got it?
During the dining scene where she, after the rest of her people, or I don't think they even gave the one dude a name with a bowl cut that he talked to at the dinner table.
Yeah.
No, he has no name.
Yeah.
That guy,
but,
he doesn't deserve one. Just
no.
he almost let her drown. I'm like, what are you doing? Like,
but after the conversation of just like, we don't know where the food comes from, and she's the only one that knows, and we're convinced by her performance it makes her special.
She can't be the only one. Well,
no, they ate the rest of the ones that that knew.
So with a budget of under $1 million, the film could not be shot on location in London. Live action scenes were filmed from May 25th to June 30th, 1959 in Culver City, California, with the backgrounds often filled with matte paintings and models. Some of the costumes and sets were reused from the film Forbidden Planet. Great science fiction film, by the way, Forbidden Planet. Now, to save money, the dome habitat of the Eloy was constructed without a ceiling so that natural light could be used instead of costly artificial lighting. The Time Machine prop was designed by MGM art director Bill Ferrari and built by Hua Chang. The shape of the Time Machine itself was inspired by one of George Pal's favorite types of childhood vehicles, a sled. This is the reason for the sled-like design of the machine so that it could, quote, slide into time. Hua Chang also designed the look of the Morlocks. In the DVD special feature titled Time Machine: The Journey Continues, visual effects designers Hua Chang, Tim Barr, and Gene Warren state that the scene of the tree limb with several apples and leaves growing on it at an accelerated rate while George moves forward in time was actually a painting done by artist Bill Brace. The canvas was photographed with a locked-off camera, one frame at a time, as Brace rendered the progressive growth of the leaves and apples in great detail. Now, the scenes where lava is shown to overrun the streets of London onto a miniature replica set, oatmeal was used as a substitute. The oatmeal had been prepared several days prior and left over the weekend, where it fermented in high temperatures, creating a foul stench in the air when it was released. For their efforts, Gene Warren and Tim Barr won the 1961 Academy Award for Best Special Effects. And We mentioned the box office performance. Critically, this did pretty well, and today it stands with a 76% Rotten Tomatoes score. And before we get to why wasn't it better, we are going to take a brief break as we hear from one of our sponsors. Today's podcast is brought to you by Sprizzy. Looking to skyrocket your YouTube channel's growth? Meet Sprizzy, your video's ultimate matchmaker. Their tailored ad campaigns connect your content with viewers who are already looking for videos like yours. With Sprizzy, you're not just getting views, you're gaining subscribers who are genuinely interested in what you create. Are you ready to boost your reach? Visit Sprizzy.com today and let's launch your channel to new heights. Sprizzy, the smarter way to promote your YouTube channel. It's time to talk about why the time machine wasn't better. Before we get to the first reason, I have to say, we're kind of basing this on random thoughts that we may have had. Because there's things you could criticize about this movie, but there's a lot of things to like. So let's just get right in. So, number one reason is the lack of aliens.
Absolutely.
This is sort of an odd reason, but basically based on some of the contemporary reviews that you can read about this film, notably from a gentleman named Bosley Crowther of the New York Times. He was a very famous film reviewer of his day, I suppose. He criticized that it would have been highly unlikely that mankind had not encountered any extraterrestrial life by 800,000 AD, which is where the main character George ends up.
Yeah. Like, how have they not improved the plate, right? Like, let's be real. Bowl plates, amazing, right? They're just using regular plates. Terrible.
No silverware. They're just
No
eating with their
silver.
hands.
Just,
Well, those aren't people. Let's say that right now. Those are cattle, essentially. Right.
Yeah, I guess.
So they've been genetically bred over time to just look look very homogenous and act like your general apathetic Gen Z teen.
Yeah.
But at the same time, those Morlocks are feasting on them. It's this lack of aliens reason too had me thinking about the films I'd released in that same time period and what sci-fi was back then, and it was very different. You had Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Blob, Doctor Strangelove, The Day the Earth Stood Still, Plan 9 from Outer Space. You see a very continuous theme around space,
War of the
Worlds, around aliens and interactions with that. And a lot of that also had to do with the political themes at the time. There were so many deep parallels to how there was a perception of aliens in this greater threat tied to the arms race in the Cold War back then.
I was going to say aliens. Do you mean communists?
Exactly, Pat. So there was probably a lot more for audiences to connect to and maybe even see those themes versus a film like this from 1960.
I think it was a interesting decision on H.G. Wells's part because obviously having written War of the Worlds, it's a subject that he had obviously thought about and covered.
Mm-hmm.
And he made the decision not to include extraterrestrial life in this film. I don't mind it because I think if you put aliens into this story, it immediately becomes a different kind of it just becomes an alien movie at that point. Whereas the time machine central plot line to this, I appreciate the simplicity of it, right? He doesn't go into the past. He only goes into the future, first briefly, then a couple decades later, and then obviously like he gets flung far into the future where this is essentially a completely different world. And for all intents and purposes, he does encounter aliens. The Eloi and the Morlocks are as far removed from the modern concept of humans as it gets, particularly the Morlocks, obviously. But another thought I have, so the time machine, it travels through time, not space. He's always going to be physically, geographically in the same location, right? The time machine can't have any influence on that. So the Eloi and the Morlock relationship that we see at where he is essentially in what is London, right? It may not be the case all over the planet. Now, I know we hear from those recording discs that there is some sort of a global war. We don't really know the details of it. So wherever he is just what used to be London. So just because we never see aliens doesn't mean that aliens never showed up at some point.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe the Morlocks just were actually bred with aliens. It's possible.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
Or they just merged from hippies and other things like that.
They're ugly enough.
It looks like they were just trying to play on some, let's make them look like hippies to make people afraid. You know, it's definitely a possibility. So,
Yeah, when watching this film, I did also start to think, like, of course, we talked about those other sci-fi films that touched on like Cold War themes, and I wanted to really think what are some of the deeper themes and meanings in this film. It does touch on some Cold War aspects, effects of nuclear war, even effects on just society, but I feel like even just the subject matter around how does society develop into the Eloi and the Morlocks, is that more of a commentary on evolution and just how things could progress after a societal collapse?
mm,
Yeah, and I think that's what's interesting about it. I'm really glad this didn't go too much into the Cold War thing because, especially, this was very faithful to the source material. Now, I
Mhm.
did read The Time Machine a very long time ago. I didn't reread it for this episode, but of course, I'm fairly familiar with the source material, and this is pretty faithful to it. So it wouldn't have made sense to get into the Cold War stuff, right? He published that thing in 1895. I like how they touch on it. I like the nuclear holocaust that we see, but they don't go deep into it, and I'm kind of grateful for it. To your point, Anton, there were plenty of contemporary films in 1960 that were already dealing with that subject. I don't think this film needed to do it, and I think it's
Mhm.
better that it didn't.
Yeah, even though this film maybe didn't go as deep as some of the other classic films we talked about, it felt more like an adventure movie because of it.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I like about it. It is very dated. I'm sure there's some very dated aspects that we're going to get into, but I like the simplicity of it. I like the old school charm. It reminds me of Magic Kingdom, Disney World
Yeah.
kind of vibe. And that's not for everyone, but I thought that it had a like a G-rated charm to it that is definitely a product of another time. And I would not want to watch this kind of movie all of the time, but I really appreciated the rewatch just because of how out of time it seemed compared to it's just so different from a science fiction movie that we would get today. And I really liked that about it.
I thought it was like just thinking about like what you guys were saying. It was like the fact that they kept it true to the book to the point where they didn't include any other aliens from that time. I just thinking about that now. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Probably why they didn't have them in there. So just had to throw that
Yeah,
in there.
you can never fault a movie for being faithful to its source material.
Yeah, so good for them.
Whether it's effective or not, then I think that's where you're going. That's debatable, but
Yeah,
they were adapting H.G. Wells's novella, and they did.
we did.
All right. Well, that's it for the lack of aliens. Number two reason, this is going to be a very, very loose discussion, but I have the second reason listed as everything else because there's a lot of different ways that you could take this. I was trying to dig up some like really obscure facts about this film, and this is a fact, but do you want your mind blown? This movie is closer to the 1800s than we now are to 1960.
I don't like that.
That's
I don't like that at all.
It's so crazy.
that's unsettling, Pat. Why'd
I
you have
know
to tell us that?
because I can.
My back hurts listening to that.
And this is something my dad pointed out. This film was made during a time when time travel was really not a big part of science fiction. I
Mhm.
feel like today, time travel is often synonymous with science fiction. Even films that you don't think about involving time travel, like I don't know, like what's one of the great science fiction movies of the 2010s, right? Interstellar. That's a time travel movie.
Endgame.
Endgame for sure.
For no
But
reason, it's a time travel movie.
well, that was the only way they could sell it, I guess. Like
Yeah.
you see in the quantum realm, it was only 5 minutes.
Right, yeah.
Sure,
Time
whatever.
heist.
Sure.
Techno babble at its finest.
Just for the record, I do like Endgame. I'm always worried when a modern film goes into time travel. You know, when like they're like any of the terrible Terminator sequels. Just oh my gosh. But
Yeah.
1960 time travel was not really common in film.
No, it
Yeah.
wasn't. Nor has it been perfected yet as a storytelling device.
I don't think there is a way to perfect it.
I will argue the only time I have ever truly enjoyed time travel used as a storytelling device has been twice. Once, Back to the Future series.
Of course, yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
Do you want to take any guesses on the second time?
Is it the Terminator?
Nope. Oh man, that one originally I would have said yes, but then it got weirder and weirder
Oh,
over
no, no, no.
time.
I mean the first two Terminators. I don't mean any of the
Yeah.
crap sequels. We don't even count the sequels. Look,
Yeah.
when it comes to the Terminator films, I think we can all agree if it's not directed by James Cameron, don't want to hear about it.
It's fair. Okay,
That's fair.
that puts it in an honorary step, yes, in there. But this isn't a film actually. It's an anime.
Oh, well, that's there's so many anime that involve time travel.
Dragon Ball Z, the Android Saga. This
Ooh, okay, that's good. Yeah.
that is some damn
Yes.
good time travel.
Yeah.
They have perfected time travel in some movies and TV shows, but it is tough.
It is hard. It is really hard.
You know what? There's a show called Timeless, and it was the best thing I've ever heard of anybody talking about time travel. It's this one guy. He's like, I can't travel back into time. I'm black. Like, and I'm like, that is the realest thing. It's like, what are you gonna do it for? So yeah, I got.
Remember the time haters from Chappelle's Show?
Yes, that was the other. The only two times I know that being black,
the player
travel
haters
in time.
ball.
Yes, travel back in time, and hey, I think I have a honky. Like,
what can I say about your suit that hasn't already been said about Afghanistan? Bombed out and depleted.
Yeah, it's
Back to the Future. That's a really good call out. That movie did time travel in a way that made sense, and we were clowning on it. But to your point, Anton, like the first two Terminators, that actually made sense to me. The fact that you can't go back, it's like a one-way ticket. Can I give you my favorite?
Please.
Okay. It's technically in a movie, but it wasn't originally. It's only in the third entry in this series. It's very, very briefly. If you remember the time turner device in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban.
Yes.
Where it's time travel is a thing in the magic world of Harry Potter, but it's highly regulated by the Ministry of Magic. And if you remember, Hermione was taking so many classes that Professor McGonagall appealed to the Ministry of the Magic to get her an authorized user of what was called a time turner. And they had to be really, really careful that she couldn't run into her past self while she was using it.
Yeah.
And I thought they handled it really, really well, the way J.K. Rowling wrote that. And of course, I think they did a really great job of putting it in the film. And to Rowling's credit, she never relied on that as a device in any of the future films, probably because it would have created plot holes, but we'll just let that go. Because it's like, well, you could just use a time turner and fix it, but you didn't. That's fine. But I really, really like how time travel was handled in that, because I feel like time travel only works in film when there's actually rules that can be followed. Otherwise, it's just a free-for-all world. You can travel in time. You can do anything. Think about it. The best time travel in film or shows, whatever, they actually create rules. Like Back to the Future, there was rules. The Terminator, there was rules. The Android Saga that you're talking about, Anton, there was rules, and you can't violate them.
You're also missing one of your favorite movies of all time, Deadpool 2.
Sure. Yeah, who could forget?
There was now there's also films, of course, and this is why I think a lot of people criticize the use of time travel, that it just becomes a lazy plot device to tell the story and move it forward. Sometimes it can be fun though, and I like it when films can be very tongue-in-cheek, say, yeah, we know it's time travel, but just have some fun. And I'm referencing, of course, the Austin Powers films.
Oh, sure. Something like that,
How about that? Yeah.
Yeah, you're never going to take it too seriously. And
and they don't ask you to, and that's why it works in that film.
Yeah.
Which is why it's really interesting to even think about this film, right? The Time Machine, 1960. Pat, you said it. They don't even try going back in the past. This isn't a film about going in the past and like trying to fix things. This is about an adventure going into the future, observing. And I feel like that's a very unique aspect of time travel that really isn't visited even in today's adaptations of time travel.
Just imagine if he had gotten a sports almanac.
Yes.
And he was just like, I'm going to go back in time and bet on the 1926 FA Cup final.
I mean, he could have also prevented his friend from dying by killing baby Hitler. I'm just saying, he could have done it. He had a time machine, and he knew the war was going to happen.
He knows that his friend died in a plane crash because
that's right.
Yeah, because he was leaving for the war.
Man, he was really selfish.
Yeah.
He just wanted to get back to Weena.
Right.
I mean, I understand part of that, but
I mean, because he did travel back into time after traveling to the future, because that's how he told the story.
It
So I'm
never
like,
occurred to him to maybe prevent World War One,
right, or two,
right?
right?
Well,
Yeah,
if you prevent one, you prevent two.
yeah. He could have killed baby Hitler. That's
He didn't even have to. All he had to do was stop World War One, and then Hitler never becomes a person, never
yeah,
becomes a thing. I mean, Hitler would have been a person, but
yeah,
he never would have rose to power, maybe.
right.
Maybe.
Or just got him into art school. Crisis averted.
Right.
You know,
He could have given him like, look, your stuff's pretty good.
yeah,
You should keep painting.
Just stick with this. Just really stick with this.
nothing else.
Just go to work at a bank. Would you like to open a bank account,
Yeah.
No, it never occurs to him to do any of this. So I was trying to think of where I knew his voice from.
Mhm.
I'm not that familiar with Rod Taylor other than the Birds, but I
Yeah.
knew that voice from some other thing. And I finally figured it out just simply by a cursory Google search. But he is the voice of Pongo in 101 Dalmatians, the original animated Disney film. And of course, I watched that movie, I don't know how many times as a little kid, probably 101 times. And when you're just a kid and you watch things over and over and over and it just becomes ingrained in your memory.
Mm-hmm.
When rewatching this the other day, I'm like, where do I know this guy's voice from? And that's it. He was Pongo.
That's that's just another fun Alfred Hitchcock connection.
Yeah.
This film also released during the same year as, of course, Psycho.
Yeah.
So.
I really like Rod Taylor in this film. I think he gives a really good performance. He absolutely carries the film.
Mm-hmm.
If his character doesn't work, the entire film would fall apart because you have to root for him. And I think you do.
Yeah. How far away is this film from being a cheesy, bad B movie if he can't sell like the emotional weight of his character?
Not far.
Yeah, it's like I honestly do think if they had cast if he wasn't in the role, it probably would have gone down more like Plan B from Outer Space.
What if it was James Mason?
If it was James Mason,
we would have gotten that wonderful mid-Atlantic accent. I see. What day is it, Mr. Thornhill? They do make those passports so good, don't they?
Oh no, the Morlocks.
I see. I'm sorry. Did you say how old you are? I suppose that doesn't matter in the future, does it? A lot of people say I used to sound like Cary Grant, but personally, I think I sound better, darling. I absolutely love doing any mid-Atlantic accent. James Mason was the king of it. Him or Cary Grant, take your pick.
What around what time zone did they like really just stop doing that? Like just stop speaking like that? Because like
that era for sure. It definitely died off by the 60s.
Yeah.
Because the transatlantic accent died like after the Gilded Age.
Same thing. Mid-Atlantic, transatlantic.
Yeah.
It was related to education. That's basically how they would teach you to speak in like upper class boarding schools. So it was definitely a thing of education and privilege and wealth. It's not quite American, not quite British. It's somewhere in between, darling.
So is that fair to say then Professor X's accent, that's really more of a transatlantic accent?
Yeah, Patrick Stewart. I'm so glad you brought that up because that's not his native accent.
Right? Like it's not.
He's like a very powerful mutant.
That's
I went
really
to
good.
boarding school.
Then he gets vaporized in that terrible movie we talked about.
Oh, yeah.
You don't know the half of it. Shut up, Logan. Such a dick. No, it's I can't believe we're talking about this now. It was a relic by the 1960s for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been probably the last decade that you would hear a transatlantic, mid-Atlantic accent like that. But definitely, it was more prevalent like pre-World War II.
That's fun.
Yeah, no, I like his character, Wells. I think it's real clever they gave him Wells, and like he was, he put enough work into that time machine that he had the brass. What do you call
stamped it? With his
the brass nameplate on it.
Yeah,
it's pretty awesome.
Where is he forging this stuff? Like in his house?
He is an inventor.
Yeah.
Doesn't it make you want to put it on the dashboard of your car?
It's a really cool thing. Just stamp
like
my name and then boom. Yeah.
H. Ben Hill.
One of random inventions that I have.
I always forgot too. He makes a miniature version of the time machine.
Yeah, like
it's like whoa, forgot about that.
How did he set the time? Right?
They didn't.
It didn't make sense.
They just guessed.
He was just like, all right, I'm gonna flip this switch and it's gonna go.
Yeah, never getting it back.
It was literally a lotter. It was a slot machine. Yeah, what it looked like.
It's like, all right, bye. I don't know.
He put a lot of work. How many copies of it do you think he had?
he had to have like at least two, right? He showed it to
Yeah.
two different groups of friends. The first group were like, nah, this is not good. And the second group was like, nah, this is not good. But fuck it, go for it. Or at least like his friend.
I like his motivation. They don't go too much into his character, but they do give him enough of a personality that he doesn't truly believe that he fits into any one time. So
Mhm.
that's why he like wanted to do this invention of a time machine so he could make an impact. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I like the rest of the actors for the most part. I like his group of friends.
Mhm.
They all felt like friends. Shout out to Sebastian Cabot. He plays the big guy. I've seen him in other stuff. You mentioned Alan Young, Anton.
Yes.
He probably has the most interesting performance. To your point, Ben, they probably used him as a cost-saving method.
Yeah. Good old Philby.
Yeah.
So I actually thought of how many parallels there were with this film and Back to the Future, using
Old
that
Biff?
same.
Yeah.
I mean, using that same thing,
Right.
you know, that same trick again, and I think like that.
Do you think that was a reference to this film?
I think so.
I think you're right. So the version of Philby that he meets in the 60s with the old makeup, he's the one that would give the almanac to like young
Yes.
World War I veteran Philby, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like-
except it was turn left, not right on that plane.
Yeah, you know he would be like, you need to move to America. There's a new invention in there. They call it basketball.
Yes.
There's many things you can bet on now. There's this new team from Boston called the Celtics. There's only 6 teams, but I promise you can make a killing on the betting.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I feel like any time travel thing we talk about is just going to end up with Back to the Future as a reference.
There's no way you can't talk about Back to the Future.
Mhm.
It's played such a big part in modern culture and movies where it's like everything else, it's like, it's like when you see those kids and like those young kids, right? And they're
Mhm.
always like, yeah, I heard this new song. And you're like, no, that's actually an older version of the song. I think that's what Back to the Future is for movies, I guess. That didn't come out as right as I wanted to say, but like, yeah,
I know what you
No,
mean.
I
Yeah.
totally hear what you're saying. I know, and I agree. It's there's not enough respect being paid to these films.
I hope they
Yeah.
never remake Back to the Future.
You didn't hear?
They can't.
They announced it like 3 weeks ago.
No.
I'm just kidding.
No.
It's
I
fucking
was
true.
going to say, I know. No, Zemeckis and Bob Gale are really real adamant about that. It's like not going to happen while we're alive.
Oh, well, hopefully they don't have any information about Boeing. Then.
Yeah, I mean, Alan Young, shout out. It's a great performance from him. He is not in the movie very much, but I like how he just tells his friend not to use the time machine. I like the dual role that he plays his son and then an older version of Biff, aka his son. Yvette Mimeo, however you say her name, she's basically a department store mannequin,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but that's what the character was, so
I really don't totally buy that her acting improved,
it didn't.
but that was just her character, right? Just love interest that is also part of like these very creepy future people.
Yeah, just so
It-
bad. It was just
Creepy's,
bad.
yeah, creepy's the right word. They're just like children. It's weird. But again, that's what the source material was
But when you
portraying them
got 'em-
as, so
Just
sure.
letting her get taken by the river and just almost drown, not
Yeah.
reacting.
No one cares. Just she dies. All right.
I love if there was another perspective on that though. Actually, everyone there was aware they just really hated her. Or just the one dude that George's character was talking to at the table. He's just eating
Yeah.
the massive grape. He's like, "Where does the food come from?" I don't know. People at the other table are just like, they're just laughing because like, why is he talking to the idiot?
Those poor people. One of the things I like about this film too is they don't really waste time on the time machine itself. They don't explain the power source. They just explain how it works, right? You can either go forward in time or backward in
Mhm.
time. That's it. I never like when movies get into a bunch of gibberish.
I don't understand that. Like he talks at the beginning of the movie explaining 4 dimensions, right? But he's like, all
Yeah.
right, well, we can only stay in this one spot when we're traveling through time. Nah.
Yeah, I guess there were a couple moments where I did kind of have to think about it a bit. One, when the lava's overtaking the time machine, but there's some sort of force that protects it from
Yeah.
anything occurring.
My
Like,
theory on that is that he's moving through time so fast that nothing that's happening in the present has any effect on him in the time machine.
yeah,
Mm.
I could see that.
That's how I interpreted it.
And then the second thing was, why did his time machine fall over? It looks really heavy. Two, there's no wheels on it. There's no I
Yeah.
feel like the way it was built, it was very
I don't think it was that heavy.
It looked base heavy.
You saw like when they brought it back into the house, it just ruined that tile. And you know, tile back then was made expensive. Like
No, but remember when he arrives in the future, it gets tipped over, and he's able to tip it back over. So maybe it's like a motorcycle.
Yeah, I don't
put your back into it. I don't know
if there is continuity with the physics here.
Yeah, lifting too much with his legs.
Maybe it was a cool design though. I think it's a really cool looking vehicle.
It's like, oh, we're gonna put a parabolic dish in the front and then a sled in the back. Perfect.
Yeah.
Let's
Well,
go.
they definitely succeeded in making it look like something from 1895.
Yeah.
I mean, what else were they gonna make it a DeLorean or something?
Yeah, something stupid.
A police box? I don't know.
I don't know if we're ever going to figure out the physics of this.
No. What's next?
Well, I do like when they explain the 4 dimensions. The first 20 minutes is basically him in a room with his friends. I appreciated it. It was enough exposition that it felt natural.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are the kinds of things you don't see in film nowadays that date this in a good way. Like, this is a scene from a film from like the 1960s.
Yeah, all the acting there felt natural.
Mm-hmm.
They set up the premise for the time machine. Shout out to the Boer War that his friend mentions. He's like, you could use this to develop weapons. The Boer War is still going on.
Down in Africa.
Yep. Yeah, I think in general it's paced pretty well. It's like, what, an hour and 40 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
It might drag a bit when he arrives in 800,000 AD, but I think it quickly picks back up. And again, the overall story of the ultra passive people being dominated by others who live underground that literally eat the good people, I think that is pretty interesting. That's a compelling premise, and why I think the last hour of this movie is very watchable.
I like to think that we've had so many iterations and things inspired by this and science fiction from the heyday that we might take it for granted. Probably this plot was very groundbreaking in 1960.
Yeah. Forget 1960. I mean, 1895, there would have been nothing else like this.
Right.
And that's why, to your point, Anton, are we taking some of these things in this film for granted? And it's like, yeah, I think we probably are. There's a lot of tropes in here that a lot of other films have borrowed from.
Yeah.
1,000,000%.
Absolutely.
It's a good thing the Eloy speak English. That was really convenient for him.
Because somehow everyone speaks English.
800,000 years later.
Yeah.
They're all like 4'3".
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. They reminded me of like hobbits, but they're Aryan.
Yeah.
They reminded me of the berries and cream guy from the
berries and cream. Yeah.
Yeah, that
the dance and stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. They remind me of that guy.
Oh. Wow.
Good. Yeah.
What was that? Was it what candy was that for?
Was it
Werther's?
Skittles, maybe something.
Not the Keebler elves.
No, I think
the berries and cream or Starburst.
Maybe it was Starburst. I think that sounds right.
But not the Care Bears.
No, not the Care Bears.
Okay. No, just making sure. Not the Ewoks.
Speaking of berries and cream,
not the Eloy.
There were cough drops that just disappeared off the face of the earth. Those little berries and cream, Werther's original, gone.
I know which ones you're talking about. Yeah.
When's the last time you've seen them?
I don't think I look. I don't look out for them.
The actual brand for them, the branded ones, haven't seen them, but I saw a version of them at the dollar store.
Okay, I need to go to a dollar store.
Yeah.
Or George could have just brought them back and just made sure they were good forever. I don't know.
That's what he dedicates his life to.
Honestly, making sure good food lasts forever, solid.
Yeah, George seems like a good guy. I think he'd do a solid like that.
Yeah, he's really too trusting, including he violates time travel 1-on-1. Always hide your time machine.
Yeah.
He just leaves it. I mean, he takes the wheel lock with him, the diamond thing.
Yeah, just in case.
Yeah, just in case. But like we know this from Back to the Future and other films. Like you got to hide that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It just goes missing. He's like, damn Morlocks.
Yeah. I'm amazed the Morlocks didn't smash it. Like this, it's like this Victorian era steampunk looking thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. How smart are they?
That's a good question. I was kind of getting the same thing. Like, how intelligent are the Morlocks actually? Enough that they know how to treat the Eloi as cattle, but I don't think that they could actually had a form of language.
But
They can run machines.
they and also build clothes and like have really nice color waves with the clothes. Like I don't get that right there. Like you can't speak. Everyone else speaks English, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like it kind of reminded me of the Star Trek female uniforms from the original series, the
Yeah.
short skirts and everything.
Mm-hmm.
The
It's like
red, there's like pink. Oh no, I think Weena might have the only pink one on. Everyone else is like summer yellow, pale yellow,
Mm.
sky blue. More of a robin's egg.
just not.
I don't know where I was going with that. These are unanswerable questions. We're just rambling at this point, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. No, this is fun to talk about.
Yeah.
What do we think of the special effects?
I thought they were really fun. I thought that especially like the stop motion stuff that they used
Yes.
to show
Yes.
time,
Yes.
really well done.
I think your description of them being really fun is the best way to describe them because it's some of the fuzziest matte lines I've ever seen. But
Right.
$800,000 budget.
It's what they do with the budget they had. You know
Yeah.
that the director has ties to stop motion, and
Mhm.
I
Yep.
thought they were very creative.
Yeah, towards the end when he's trying to get away from the Morlocks and you just see the Morlock age and
Yes.
the skeleton dissolves, it's pretty effective
Yeah.
shot.
Sorry, I had to laugh just that sentence. You remember that scene where he has to run away from the Morlocks? Like,
Yeah,
yes,
I mean, look, there are a bunch of effects in this film that are quite dated, but I don't want to hate on it too much because factoring the budget into the equation, they squeezed every dollar out of it that they possibly could. And I think
Mhm.
this is a very well filmed movie.
Yeah. But I don't know.
I'm being polite.
I think that you're yes, you're being polite, but I think like for 1960, again, for the budget they had, they did a great job.
Yeah.
And especially just for the fact that I think it's fair to say that a lot of the subject matter was very on the surface, nothing too deep.
No.
It really did feel like this is a fun science fiction caper. The dude's going future in time. Oh no, like two different races of people. What's up with that? What does that say about society? They don't really dive into
Mhm.
that too much. They
No.
just treat it a lot more fun. And I feel like that's why maybe this film doesn't go down as a classic compared to some of its contemporaries. But at the same time, this does have a really important place because of the use of time travel and its effects and its budget at the time that it was made.
I think it's a classic by association because of the title that it has. The Time Machine is always going to be a classic regardless of what adaptations of it there are. I think it's safe to say this is probably better remembered than the 2002 remake, I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people are thinking about Guy Pearce in that film.
Nor should they. Getting back to the film here, right? I actually really liked the talking rings, the technology concept that gets introduced.
Amazing.
Really cool, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And often you see technology from movies inspire future technologies, right? That is something that I have no idea why is not a thing right now. Like it should definitely be a thing.
It's fun too because when you watch like old cartoons that depict like the world of tomorrow, it's usually just like amped up things of like that day and age, like
Yeah.
like you'll be able to use you'll be able to have a phone in the future, but it's still just technically a rotary phone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But here I feel like it's a very novel look at like what communication could be. So that is really, really neat.
Yeah, it reminds me of something you would see in like a science museum for kids, like something like a Smithsonian
Mm-hmm.
type of deal. It was just really cool. I don't think I've ever seen that in a movie before. I don't know how long the recordings last too. Like, do you have to keep spinning it? Does it just keep replaying the same thing over?
Yeah,
Like,
I think
can you rewind it by turning it the other way? You know?
Spin it the opposite way?
Yeah.
I think the closest thing would be in the anime Monster Rancher, where they would use PS1 disc to be able to summon creatures.
That's a deep cut.
Yeah.
That is a deep cut. I don't know what the heck that is. What do we think of the Morlocks?
I mean, this is just my personal take. I thought they looked really goofy.
They do. I have in my notes cheap but effective.
Yeah. They look like a combination of hippies and the abominable snowman from that Rudolph movie. It's just, like, that's
They,
That's it. That's what they are.
yeah, like,
yep,
Oh,
that's a really, really good. Oh my
that's
gosh.
exactly what it is. I think in some shots it's pretty effective. I think when they're in the
yeah.
dark and you can see their eyes
Mhm.
That's much
glowing,
better.
pretty effective.
Yeah.
The less light, the better for,
Yeah.
Mhm.
for the Morlocks. Um,
Yeah.
I meant
The higher definition you see this movie in, the worse it gets.
the,
But
the
again,
worst.
It's terrible.
$800,000 budget. They did the best they could.
Yeah, I mentioned this, Pat, before the recording. If you go back to the scene where Weena's getting like kind of captured by a Morlock, you can see that Morlock actor forgot his mask, and that ended up in the final cut.
I don't think you would have noticed that in standard definition, but in
Yeah.
1080p, you can see right through that bush.
Yeah.
Again, $800,000 budget.
And you know what? You know what we know about the Morlocks? They're very clean eaters. Those bones were just picked clean,
All the way.
Yeah,
and
efficient.
like full skeleton too. Like they didn't just they didn't carve people up. They were very respectful.
I like that whole sequence too. It's pretty creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, the whole idea of the Morlocks living underground and feeding on the Eloi, it is a very effective story, I think.
Yeah.
Again, we're very jaded because we've heard twists and turns and every single interpretation of what kind of great plot or crazy plot twists that we've heard of crazy reveals in film. But this probably was very haunting and groundbreaking for 1960.
Oh, it would have been, yeah. And I don't mind the simplicity of it. I'm grateful they didn't go into some multiverse
Mhm.
crap that you would expect with a time travel movie now.
Yeah.
They kept it simple. It's very linear, and there's really no plot holes in it, which you have to give them a lot of credit for that. There's nothing in it that doesn't make sense within the context of the story they're telling, I suppose,
Yeah.
other than the mechanics of the time sled.
Yeah, and then there's no going back and trying to fix something. It only begs the
Right.
question, should he go back and fix something?
Right. I mean, you would think preventing a world war would be a bigger deal than going 800,000 years into the future to help a
teach
bunch of
them-
hippies, but whatever.
To help them farm? Like, come on.
Yeah.
Like,
I
give
mean,
them
it was
the
very
right
obvious they
resources.
were incapable of doing anything.
Yeah. Like, which also makes me think, who built the statue's head on top of the building?
On the Sphinx?
It had to
yeah,
be the
Sphinx.
Morlocks, right?
Yeah, but they don't like being outside. Like,
They could have done it at night.
it's very true.
Night shift crew.
Come, it's your turn. Tag, you're it.
So I have not seen any of this or read any of this, but there are a couple of sequels to this.
No.
The book sequel is called The Time Ships, and it was written by Stephen Baxter. I am a bit surprised to hear that it hasn't been adapted into a movie because this is officially licensed by the H.G. Wells estate. It's written in the same style, and it begins with George traveling back to the future to save Weena because in the book, she gets killed in a fire. Seems like something that they would have adapted in over the years, but they didn't. And
Yeah.
then this is where it gets weird. In 1979, there was a movie called Time After Time released.
Mm-hmm.
H.G. Wells, played by Malcolm McDowell, travels to modern-day San Francisco in his time machine in pursuit of Jack the Ripper. It sounds terrible, but it actually got pretty good reviews. I've never seen it. Anton, have you?
I have. It's really funny. This is a not great film, but it's actually a pretty memorable film. From the Malcolm McDowell performance, who I think is a pretty great actor, but also just another funny. We've come full circle. We talked about it. This is one of the films that James Rhodes' character references in Endgame, where he's talking about all the time travel films: Back to the Future, Time Cop, Time After Time.
Mm-hmm.
He references Time After Time, but not this.
Yeah. Maybe he said Time Machine. I'm remembering Time After Time.
You might be right. Oh, and of course, we also have the 2002 remake of this film starring Guy Pearce, directed by Simon Wells, the great-grandson of H.G. Wells, which is kind of cool. Too bad the film sucked.
This is his first time.
Yeah, and it starred contemporary pop star Samantha Mumba. And if you don't remember her name, that's okay. No one else does either.
Nope.
So the gentleman that directed this film, George Powell, right? His career never really took off. The following year, he directed Atlantis, The Lost Continent, which I've never seen, and then also a handful of B movies. He died in 1980, but you'll appreciate this, Anton. Some of his unrealized projects include an adaptation of Logan's Run and a sequel to The Wizard of Oz. Kind of cool.
Yeah, that is kind of cool. And like, I'm definitely curious which sequel to Wizard of Oz.
I didn't write that down, so I don't know.
It was
You
actually
You could probably
the Wiz.
Google it though.
Yeah,
He was
I'll look it
gonna
up.
do the Wiz. That's what it was.
I was gonna say, remember the Wiz? I don't think he did the Wiz.
Oh, Ben, do you want to be on that episode? It's on our list.
No. Maybe.
Have you ever seen Return to Oz?
No, I haven't. I've seen Oz. Never mind. The HBO show.
Oz, the HBO series.
Yeah. It's Return to Oz came out in the 80s. It's a pseudo sequel to The Wizard of Oz, and it is terrifying.
I'll definitely
Pretty
check
interesting
that out
movie.
at the public library.
Or you can go to Disney Plus.
Oh, I need that too.
Yeah. If you don't want to drive anywhere. I don't really have any other thoughts about this film, The Time Machine. I feel like the listeners have absolutely no idea what we think of this film because we've been both critical of it and we've given it its praises as well.
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
Anything to add before we wrap this up?
Do you think the Morlocks ate the Eloi raw?
Did they season them? Yeah.
I feel like they had ovens down there.
I feel like they must they use technology, but they don't. They seem primitive, but somewhat intelligent.
I can't remember if the book goes into any of the details, but I will say this. One of the few things that I liked about the 2002 remake is that if you remember, there was a Morlock leader played by Jeremy Irons who gave a lot more context into like the intelligence of the Morlocks.
I do remember that, actually.
I don't remember anything else about it, but I remember thinking like, that's kind of cool. They have like a boss.
That's pretty solid.
Yeah.
I don't want to revisit that film. Oh, please go ahead, Ben.
In doing some research, I found out that George's house was used in the Twilight Zone.
That's cool.
That's pretty awesome. Good old sketchy TV show as well. But
what a cool show that was.
Yeah. I saw I think there was a remake with
it's with
Jordan Peele.
Jordan Peele. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was on UPN.
UPN? That channel's still around?
Probably not.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
No, that came out a few years ago, right?
No, it was from the last time. Yeah. Now UPM. Oh man. Now I'm gonna add that to the list of shows to watch as well after reading that. But
let me know.
I'm ready to give my judgment if you guys are.
We are ready. Please, Ben, take it away.
Okay. So this movie, although it inspired so much stuff, the tropes in there, amazing. I'm giving it an F. Off of just a huge
wow.
F, because George had the opportunity, right, to not only save his friend, but prevent so many other deaths along the way and advance society even more. But instead, he went to go back, tell his friends the story, take some books, and help people further out in the future. For that right there, huge F.
Are you actually giving it an F based on that?
I'm giving just off
it's
of
an
that.
F. It's literally an F on principle.
Just off of principle. That.
What about as a movie?
All right, as a movie, all right, it's a B. But
like wow, that's like really harsh.
I really like that trope that they started with Philby. That's literally one of my favorite things of all time for time travel movies. And they also didn't go through any like paradoxes. They kept it simple. That's why it has a B. But just off of what George did, F, failed. So altogether, D plus. We'll just say D plus. That's
so as a movie though, B.
As a movie with the visuals, yes.
Okay.
And for its time, B.
I think we'll officially put it under a B.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess.
It's a really good point about his character. You're like, man, he's an asshole. Like,
yeah.
Anton, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'm happy to go next.
Okay.
So I think that when we look at this film as a product of 1960 and what it has helped to influence, I think that this film really gets overlooked as a classic. I think that there are other science fiction films that definitely held in much higher regard because they're able to delve into such very deep and nuanced themes. And this film is a bit more on the surface, but a bit more fun, a bit more of an adventure film. And I feel like for that, it was just that fun. And you see that in the effects, you see that in the costuming, you see it in the use of matte paintings in the film. It did what it had to for its budget, and at the same time, I could see that this was a cast that had a lot of fun putting it together, and you saw that on screen. And in doing so, it was a very influential film, very well paced. I feel like there was a lot of appreciation that is definitely felt from me watching this film, that I feel like a lot of listeners who maybe have not seen this film but have seen all of the science fiction and time travel films that we've listed over the course of this episode that have this film to thank, that have this novel to thank. So I highly recommend, go check out The Time Machine 1960. For me, this film lands at a B.
I'm trying to decide whether or not this is a true classic. In my opinion, a classic is not always a great film, but it usually is. Classics usually equate quality, although not always so. In my opinion, if you have to explain what a movie is in more than like a sentence or two, it's probably not a classic. I don't know that this is a full-fledged classic. It's more like a tier 2 classic to me. It's certainly a classic of science fiction, because to both of your points, there's a lot of modern sci-fi and time travel movies that borrow from this and its source material. I think this is a good movie. I don't think it's great. I think it's got some flaws. It's got some stuff that's dated, but I really enjoyed rewatching it. I really like the main character in spite of his selfishness, as Ben pointed out. I liked Rod Taylor in the role. I liked the effects, even though they're pretty goofy in a dated way. But again, I with the budget, I can't really hold it against it. I thought it was really well paced. I like the premise of the Eloi and the Morlocks. That stuff is iconic. And it is definitely a classic science fiction film. I'm really glad that it held up for the most part, because like I said, I hadn't seen this since I was probably 10 years old or so. And that's always a risk when you watch something after that amount of time, especially a movie this old, is a lot of stuff just doesn't hold up. And this one did for the most part. And I was really, really grateful for that. This was a great suggestion by my dad. I would highly recommend this movie if you have any interest in old school classic science fiction. This has got plenty of stuff to like. It's the definition of a B movie. I'm giving this a B as well, not to be boring, but it's not A material. It's not quite on that level, but it's a compelling story that has really good production values despite having a really low budget. And yeah, B. Check it out. I recommend The Time Machine.
Absolutely.
Well, gentlemen, here we are. What
That's
a
it.
film. What a
Yeah.
film that we covered. That was a fun
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Ben, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me. As always, this is a pleasure.
Yeah, it's good to know that we can have you on as a last minute addition.
Oh yeah, always ready.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. It's again always a pleasure having you on. Hope to hear from you soon. Would love to again hear your thoughts on X-Men 97. So let us know when you get a chance to watch all that.
All right.
And from all of us here at Why Wasn't It Better, we will see you next week. It's a big one, Anton. It's going to be Batman, the 1989 version.
All right, let's get nuts.
Speaking of anniversaries, that's the 35th anniversary. So we will see you then. Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening to Why Wasn't It Better? If you've made it this far, it's safe to assume that you like what you hear. If you have not already done so, please hit that subscribe button and become a follower wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you really like what you hear, you can contribute to our podcast monetarily and sign up for our Patreon. So whether you're commuting, chilling at home, or embarking on a nostalgia-fueled movie adventure, make Why Wasn't It Better your go-to podcast companion.